Learn my life story based on how I smelled. It's really not that weird. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. So I've mentioned in some previous videos that I have been trying to clean up my beauty routine, try to switch to non-toxic, cleaner beauty products. And one of the ways I've been doing that is eliminating a lot of fragrances. And I cut out my entire perfume fragrance collection, but I really kind of missed having fragrances and scents in my life. So I decided to go on sort of a journey to find really great like clean fragrances. So I thought I would document that journey in case it might be helpful for any of you if you're looking for a favorite clean fragrance or you want to clean up some of your beauty products in your life. I have videos on here talking about my favorite clean makeup products, clean skincare products, and clean hair care products. But as far as clean fragrances, I started to do some research. I kind of fell down the rabbit hole of fragrance review videos on YouTube, and I started to kind of look into like how people were sharing fragrance reviews, some of the things that were helpful to people, and that, you know, looked at some of the feedback in some of these videos. And I found different types of fragrance videos to be helpful for different people. So I thought I would film a couple different types of fragrance review videos and do it in multiple parts so you guys can watch all the different parts or just focus on the ones that you think would be the most helpful for you. So I'll make this into a little bit of a series and I'll make a playlist for everything. Now I have a video on here already from a while ago that was actually like tips on how to find a signature scent. While I don't still use the signature scents that I mentioned in that video, and I'm going to talk about that in this video, but I don't use any like mainstream fragrances anymore. But the tips on how to pick a signature scent in that video are still good, so I will link that video to this one if you guys want to check that out. But this is going to be kind of the first part of my clean beauty fragrance journey, I would say. The first part of this journey is really going to be about like my fragrance history. One of the reasons I was inspired to do this was in watching some other fragrance reviews. A lot of people were saying that they found it very helpful when the reviewer gave like their current scent favorites or the fragrance favorites that they really loved, or their favorite fragrances, as like a baseline, so that when they were reviewing other fragrances, people kind of knew like what their scent taste was. So I don't use any current fragrances right now, but I started to think about some of the fragrances that I have used in history, and I kind of started making notes about all of the different fragrances that I have used kind of throughout my life. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to make a video that's a little bit get to know me, but also like get to know me from the point of view of my fragrance history. So I kind of made a note of like all the different perfumes that were really kind of like my go-tos at different points in my life, and a little bit about the fragrances and stuff like that. I just, you know, I thought this might kind of be interesting. Some of you might like find this interesting if you want to get to know a little bit more about me, if you've been watching my videos and you want to see something that's a little bit more like personal about my backstory. Some of you might find this, like especially if you're in my age range, you might find this nostalgic, because a lot of these fragrances like were pretty popular in their time, but like aren't still in existence. Some of them are, but a lot of them don't exist anymore. So I don't know, I just thought you guys might find some of this interesting as far as like a scent history throughout my life. After this, I'm gonna film a first impression video of a bunch of clean fragrance samples that I have found. So I'll make that into a separate video. And then I'll do a follow-up video with some of the clean beauty fragrances that I test over time to kind of give you an update on like how well they last, kind of the overall quality, and like what my impression is after trying them out. So this will be my scent history. I'll do a first impression, and then I'll also do like a follow-up. So you can watch all of these and get all of the scent information, or you can just pick and choose the ones that you find the most helpful. If you find first impressions helpful, if you want like a follow-up video and you find that more helpful, it's up to you. I'll give you the options. So I'm gonna get started with my fragrance history. And I started out with just a few fragrances that I remembered from like my past. And I started coming up with like more and more that I could think of were just like a big part of my life. So this list is kind of long. The first major fragrance I remember purchasing, which I think is very symbolic in a lot of different ways. So this is actually the fragrance I purchased for, I believe, my junior prom. I think I purchased it for originally, but I wore it for my junior and senior prom. Little backstory about my high school years. I did go to a private Catholic high school. This was in the 90s. I'm aging myself for sure. This was the era of grunge, flannel and baggy jeans, and I think it was kind of the start of like the no makeup look. Maybe not the start of it, but like that was kind of the popular thing at the time. Everyone was wearing like mauve lipstick and like brown lipstick and things like that. In fact, I believe it was my senior year, the iconic dress that everybody wanted to have their prom dress emulate, like kind of the model for what a lot of prom dresses were, which was like the slinky slip dress, was actually the wedding dress that Carolyn Bessette Kennedy wore for her wedding with JFK Jr. It was believe a Calvin Klein, if I'm not mistaken. It was like a very slinky slip dress type of a thing, which was very iconic for its time. I feel like Calvin Klein fragrances at that time were like what everybody was wearing. Like that was the big thing. Like it was the 90s. I, on the other hand, had this weird obsession with old Hollywood glamour at that point in time. I was a drama nerd. I wanted to be Marilyn Monroe, and I don't even really know why at the time, because I didn't watch her movies, because I didn't really have access to her movies. Like it wasn't something that I had on video or anything, so it was just like images of her or like clips I'd seen. I had this dream that I was gonna have a dress in like pink satin, like her Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend gown, which didn't happen, but that was kind of like my dream. So I had this like obsession with old Hollywood glamour, which was very different than the grunge and like the Calvin Klein minimalism and stuff that was on trend at the time. So I decided to purchase, as my first fragrance purchase, Elizabeth Taylor White Diamonds, because to me Elizabeth Taylor fragrance was kind of like the closest thing I could get to Marilyn Monroe. She was kind of like the brunette Marilyn Monroe, and I was obsessed with the idea of white diamonds, so I was a sucker for a name which is actually a common theme that happens throughout my fragrance history. You know, I didn't not like the fragrance, but if I'm being totally honest, like it was a more mature fragrance than what like a teenage girl would normally wear. It was the name that was really getting me. It was the fact that it was Elizabeth Taylor, it was white diamonds. That was like my thing. It didn't smell bad. Like it wasn't like I didn't like it, but it wasn't really about the scent, and it was a little bit too mature for me at the time. But it was interesting because I looked it up, and I looked up some of the notes, and there are actually quite a few notes in there. I don't really remember what it smells like. Probably if I smelled it, it would kind of bring back a memory, because there are a lot of scent memory things that come up in the story. But there's a lot of fragrances in here, like Neroli, tuberose, that kind of come up a lot in like a lot of other fragrances. So it is kind of an interesting like start to my fragrance journey. But again, I really got it because of the name and because I was so obsessed with old Hollywood glamour. At the time period, that was kind of like the closest I felt like I could get to something that was like old Hollywood. Even though that was not the trend at the time, I was like a weird drama nerd, and you know, I didn't even date in high school. I didn't actually go on my first date until after I graduated from high school. I went to my proms, but like with guy friends, I was a drama nerd, so most of my guy friends ended up being gay. So I just didn't really date in high school. So I wasn't really wearing it to impress anybody. It was literally just the old Hollywood association. So then after high school, and I did start dating my first boyfriend the summer after I graduated from high school, and that was when Victoria's Secret really started to get into fragrances and body sprays. And I don't know if they were the first people to do like body sprays, but they were the first ones like I was aware of to really make the body spray trend popular. I feel like I knew about the Victoria's Secret ones, and then Bath and Body Works kind of got really popular after that. I didn't really go for Bath and Body Works body sprays as much. I usually went for the Victoria's Secret ones. I don't know which ones came first, but I found the Victoria's Secret ones before I found the Bath and Body Works ones. The Victoria's Secret body sprays, they would have like different like fragrance types, and they would have like a whole set of like the body spray, the body wash, the body lotion, the hand lotions, like all kinds of different like body butters. Like they had all kinds of different products and stuff, and you would layer them all together because they weren't super long lasting, but if you layered them, they would last a lot longer, and they would really make your skin like smell like the scent. I was obsessed with their product that was called Vanilla Lace. That was kind of my go-to, which was the start of my like vanilla fragrance obsession. Pretty common one, I would imagine, for a lot of people. A lot of scents have vanilla in them. They're very popular. I remember my like first boyfriend at the time was like obsessed with that scent. He loved when I wore that, so of course I wore it more because I was like young and in love. It's interesting too because he wore Polo Sport, and I still can't smell Polo Sport without like it bringing me back to like being a teenager in a torturous relationship. So yeah, I wore Victoria's Secret Vanilla Lace. That was my go-to. I also wore another fragrance that was super popular at the time that again, I only liked it because of the name, because it didn't really smell all that great. It was called Strawberries and Champagne, and I just thought that was such a cool like mature name. I mean, I was like 18, 19 years old, right? So like I just thought that that was like such a cool like mature name. I don't remember it really smelling that good. Like I don't think it really smelled like strawberries very much. And it's interesting because that one, Strawberries and Champagne, and Vanilla Lace, I think too, to a certain extent, kind of got known as like stereotypical stripper like scents. I wasn't exactly going for classy at the time. So then I discovered a signature fragrance that I probably wore for years. This was maybe the first fragrance. Well, I mean, I used to go through the Victoria's Secret ones like pretty regularly, but they were just like body sprays, so they weren't like a perfume fragrance. But this was actually the first fragrance I bought like multiple bottles of because I was so obsessed with it. I got it because of the name, 100%. The bottle was also gorgeous. It's not still in production, but it was called Versace Blonde. This was the time period when I was like 17, 18 that I started to go blonde. I've gotten consistently blonder throughout the years in hair color and in personality. Yeah, I was obsessed with anything blonde. So Versace Blonde, I read about it I think in a magazine somewhere, and I tried to track it down because bear in mind at this time period in history, kids, for those of you that don't remember, the internet was just becoming a thing. Online shopping was not that common. You could catalog shop. That's how I got some of my Victoria's Secret stuff, was through like the catalog, or you'd actually have to like call and like give them your information on the phone and stuff like that. Because I don't think we had a Victoria's Secret store near me for a while. We ended up with one like down the road, but I think at that point I still had to order through the catalog, but I don't remember the exact time period with that. So getting the Versace Blonde fragrance was actually like, I think I had to track it down at like an outlet store. I remember it being really difficult to get, and I don't remember it. Like I probably, if I smelled it, it would come back to me, but I remember getting it and really loving it at the time. And it's not that surprising because it also had like Neroli, Tuberose. Like I feel like those are kind of some of my go-to scents. The bottle was beautiful. It was like, it had like the Versace symbol like etched in glass. I wore that fragrance like off and on like for ever. When I kind of like turned 21 and I started going out like clubs and dressing up and like going out, and that was kind of like my nightlife fragrance and stuff for like a long time. And I actually went through a couple bottles of that, which is rare for me. Like I rarely ever go through like an entire bottle of a fragrance. So then it was around that time that I actually discovered this book, which I consider this my Bible. It's the Bombshell Manual of Style. I don't know if this is still in print. My copy is very well worn. I've had this for so long. I think I got a backup copy that's like I just put off to the side in case something ever happened to this one because I love this book so much. It's like all about old Hollywood bombshells. Shocker that I would love it. And there's so much different stuff in here, but there's a whole chapter in here about perfumes and like different perfumes that like old Hollywood starlets like have worn, or you know, what they might have worn in their time period, like different stuff like that. It's a pretty big chapter in here, and I actually kind of went on a quest to try to collect all of the perfumes that were listed here, which perfumes are very expensive. So, and some of them were actually even discontinued even when the book came out, and some of them have been discontinued since then. So I never really got the whole collection of all of them, but I did get pretty close, and it was a lot of money that I collected over the years. In that time period, I started to actually create an entire shelf that was like all like perfume bottles, and like most of them were just for show. I'm kind of a sucker for a cute perfume bottle. I was getting a lot of them like just for the aesthetic, which is actually a very expensive way of decorating a shelf, let me tell you, because perfumes aren't cheap. One of the things is that some of the fragrances that are so iconic, especially among old Hollywood starlets, like I would say like any of the Chanel fragrances, which I had, I think most of the Chanel fragrances at one point, just for the iconic bottle. And then things like Shalimar and stuff like that that are like very iconic and associated with like old Hollywood starlets. I don't like them on me, and it really breaks my heart because I really wanted to fall in love with Chanel fragrances, and I love the bottle, and again I had them all that I was like collecting and stuff. This just goes to like sense memory, and to be honest, they always smelled like the grumpy old ladies in church. That I grew up with and stuff. So I couldn't get used to them. Like they just didn't feel like, they didn't make me feel like young and sexy. So I had them like for the bottle and the aesthetic. And I did try a lot of fragrances that were mentioned in this book. Some of them I liked. There was Durissimo by Dior that was like a very light like Lily of the Valley fragrance that I wore sometimes that I really did like. And then there was also another one that I wore a lot that is not still available. I couldn't find it. Nude by Bill Blass that I actually really liked wearing. But it was actually from this book that I discovered my next like go-to fragrance that I've been through multiple bottles of, and that was Spring Flower by Creed. That's one of the ones mentioned in this book, and it's actually not even like highlighted so much in this book. It's just kind of like just one of the ones listed. It's interesting because Creed was not as popular a fragrance brand as it is now. I feel like I see a lot more influencers, like I have in the past few years or so, talking about like Creed fragrances, particularly like men's fragrances and stuff, but it's gotten more popular popular, I think more mainstream. But at the time I discovered this, it was not that popular and it was hard to come about. I started working around this time. This was probably like the early 2000s, early into like the mid 2000s. I started working in a very high-end retail store, so I had access to fancier brands than I had before. Online shopping was becoming more popular at this time too, so it was a little bit easier to get your hands on some of these things, but not still super easy. And where I grew up, like we didn't have, like we had some department stores, but like they were very limited. Like I didn't grow up in a place that had a lot of like designer brands. Like I would say where I grew up, like I always like to say, like where I grew up, like if you owned a Coach bag, it was like, who do you think you are that you own Coach? Like that was like as fancy as you get. And then I actually moved a little bit closer to the city and I started working Boston, if you're wondering what city I'm talking about. And I started working in a very high-end retail store, so like people were like wearing like Dior. And I remember one girl saying to me one time that she saw a girl with a Coach bag and she was like, oh my god, Coach is so high school. And I was like, you had Coach in high school? When I was in high school, I carried like my mom's hand-me-down purse she got at like Caldor's or Bradley's or something like that or whatever, which you kids won't even know what that store is. They shut down a long time ago. But like I did not know from designer brands when I was a kid or anything, and then I started working in this like high-end retail store. So I'm pretty sure that the retail store I worked in, although I didn't work in like the beauty counters or fragrances or anything, I'm pretty sure that I could get Creed there. And like I remember the other girls that I was working with like at the time who were really into designer brands, they knew way more designer brands than I did, were all kind of like, Creed, what's that? Like that wasn't really like a popular thing even among people that knew designer brands at the time. But I wore Spring Flower like all the time. It was my go-to because I think of all the fragrances mentioned in this book, it felt the most youthful for me. And it's interesting because it's called Spring Flower. And it's funny how like it was a beautiful pink bottle. Like again, I'm a sucker for like packaging and like the whole aesthetic of it. It's funny how the power of suggestion, because the idea of it being Spring Flower, I always thought of it as like a heavy floral. But when I actually printed out the description of it, and they're talking about notes of apple, melon, and peach with jasmine and rose and then musk. And it's interesting how like thinking back, I'm like, oh, that was a very fruity floral fragrance. But because it was called Spring Flower, I always thought of it as being a heavy floral, but it actually was a lot more fruity than it was floral. It's just interesting how like the name can actually just like alter how you see it. But yeah, that was my go-to for years, and that was again another thing that I went through multiple bottles of because I was so obsessed with that fragrance. Another fragrance I actually discovered from this book that was a classic like older fragrance, but I felt like it was a little bit more youthful than, I think Chanel wasn't necessarily like, it wasn't that it wasn't youthful, but it just is, I knew so many like elderly women that wore it that I was just like, I had that association. But I really got into the fragrance Joy by Jean Patou, I guess. I don't know how you say that. For some reason it was a mature fragrance, but it didn't feel old to me. So that kind of became a little bit more of my, like Spring Flower was a little bit more like my like light summery fragrance, and Joy became a little bit more of a go-to for when I wanted something a little bit more dressy or more formal. And that again has notes of, it's got tuberose, ylang ylang. A lot of these fragrances have had ylang ylang. Rose, which is common, like musk and sandalwoods, jasmines, like kind of a lot of your typical floral fragrances and stuff. So that was kind of like a go-to for me for a while too, like around the same time period. It was considered at one point the most expensive perfume in the world. It's probably not still. So I think I may have gone through multiple bottles of it, but I always like prayed that I wouldn't have to because I didn't want to spend that much money on it. But it probably was about the same price as like the Creed fragrance and the Versace one and stuff like that. Okay, so then after going from that kind of like very mature, expensive fragrances, I discovered and I guess this kind of was a little bit more of like a throwback to my Victoria's Secret body spray days. That is when I discovered Jessica Simpson's dessert line. If any of you are like old enough to remember, Jessica Simpson had her reality show, The Newlyweds, when she was married to Nick Lachey, and she has associated herself over the years with some really great products. Like I will give it to Jessica Simpson. I know she paints herself as like kind of this like dumb blonde, so I don't really know if this is like her genius or she's got a lot of good people around her that are helping her with this, but like she really does associate herself with some good products. Like I still have some of her shoes that I bought when she first launched her shoe line that are still like great quality. I haven't bought any shoes from her in a very long time, so I don't know like if the quality of her products has stayed, because I know there are a lot of brands that like over the years the quality has declined. I don't know if they're still that good because I haven't tried them, but like originally, like for mid-priced products, like what Jessica was putting out, great quality. And Jessica's dessert line, I swear by, was actually like amazing. I mean, again, not like non-toxic, although the key with this dessert line was that it was like edible. Now, you wouldn't necessarily like eat it. I mean, I don't know if you could or not. I probably wouldn't ingest a ton of it, but like it was something that like if you sprayed it on yourself and like somebody kissed you, you could like lick it off kind of thing. Like it had like that sort of, it was cutesy, but it had like a sexual innuendo to it kind of thing. I think it expanded into a few other scents, but it originally released with like 3 main scents. It was actually in Sephora for a while, and then I think it ended up kind of like getting discounted and ending up in like lower price stores. And then I think it shut down because I think she got sued because if I remember my lore properly, it was something about somebody else claimed that someone took the idea from them or whatever, and it just became kind of a hassle. So it just kind of disappeared. It came in 3 different scents. There was the most popular one, which was Creamy, which was a very caramelly scent. Then there was Juicy, which was a fruitier scent. And then there was Dreamy. Dreamy was my favorite, and I was obsessed with Dreamy. And it was more, I mean, it's interesting because it lists it as having like coconut, which I don't really remember, but it had like chocolate, cacao, vanilla. Like it was a very chocolatey fragrance. And that kind of started my obsession with chocolate fragrances. And I will tell you, I have never in my life gotten so many compliments, particularly from men, when wearing that fragrance. It was basically like body sprays and like body lotions and like body products similar to the Victoria's Secret line, and then what Bath & Body Works was doing and stuff like that. It was kind of similar to that as opposed to like an actual like fragrance perfume, although I do think that they did have like a eau de toilette version of it or something like that. But like it was something that was meant to be layered to last longer. It was around this time period that I was wearing this that I started doing stand-up comedy. So it's just like mid 2000s. So I was kind of surrounded by men all the time. Well, I was surrounded by males. A lot of them were still boys, but shocker. That's kind of the case anytime you're around a lot of guys nowadays, right? They're mostly little boys, even when they're grown-ups. But I started wearing, I would layer them, and one thing I would do, I don't know what was in this body spray. They had this like kind of like body spray / hair mist, and I swear to God, like I would like flip my head over, spray the hair mist on my hair, flip it back, tousle it, and it was like this amazing like texture spray. Like it gave my hair such like an amazing texture. I just loved this stuff. Like I was just obsessed with it. So like I put it on, it never felt like overpowering, but if you layered it, it would last a good amount of time. And I swear to God, I had so many guys that would come up and sniff me and then be like, you smell so good, right? Because I smell like chocolate. I mean, so obviously if that's not your thing, I mean, there were definitely people I didn't want sniffing me at the time. So I guess you can decide whether or not that's a good or bad thing. But I will tell you, I got more compliments wearing that scent than any other scent. Like that was an obsession for me. I was actually pretty heartbroken when they stopped making it. Okay, so then there were my pink sugar years. There was a brand called Aquolina. I don't actually know if they're still in production anymore. They're most iconically known for their pink sugar fragrance, which is very pink. It's very girly, kind of smells like cotton candy. I love it, but I always felt like, I think by the time I found it, I was just like, I felt like it was too young for me, but I really did love it, you know, because it was pink and girly, and it was a gourmand, as I've discovered, like really do love my gourmand fragrances, like the vanillas and the chocolates and things like that. So this actually, pink sugar, had raspberry, orange, bergamot, fig, cotton candy, licorice, strawberry, red berries, the lily of the valley, caramel, vanilla, musk, tonka bean, sandalwood. It was a gourmand, and like I kept going back to it, but then I would put it on and I'd be like, I feel like this is too young for me, even though I was still like in my 20s when I first discovered it. But like I kind of kept it throughout, forward into my 30s. But again, it was one of those things where like I loved it and I loved all the fragrances, but then I would put it on and I'd be like, it feels too young. They came out with one for a while, and I don't know if they kept this around for too long, called Gold Sugar, which was similar but a little bit more mature. And I actually used to wear like pink sugar during the day and then Gold Sugar in the evenings, like as like my night out fragrance. That one was a little bit more like, it had like more like creme brulee and orange and coconut and that kind of stuff to it. So it was a little bit more, I feel like it was a little bit more mature. And I kept those like forever and wore them off and on for years. Okay, so next is the Tom Ford years. I got really into Tom Ford fragrances, which are really expensive. They last a really long time, so I will give it to them. Like, if you get the perfume and you get Tom Ford, like, it's gonna last you a while. They're very intense, they're very strong. You know what's really strange to me when I was actually going through this list? Like, I remember the fragrances I wore to my prom. I can remember the fragrances I wore like with my first boyfriend and like all the years. But the Tom Ford years, it's interesting. I was with my ex-husband at the time that were kind of my Tom Ford years, and those years are really fuzzy to me. Like, a little aside from that, I remember, like, 'cause I have like typically a razor sharp memory. Like, sometimes it's almost photographic. And I started having a lot of memory problems around this time period. This was kind of like, trying to think, because I think I got married in 2016, I want to say. So, I mean, we're talking like maybe like 2014, like into 2020, like kind of like, I'll say like 2015 to 2020, like those kind of years are really fuzzy to me. Like, I remember a lot of things, but there's definitely some things that people will say to me that happened at that time and I'll be like, I don't remember that at all. Like, there's so many things that are just kind of like not in my memory. And I remember actually in that time period starting to be really concerned because there were things that just couldn't remember and my memory was just really not doing well. And I went to my doctor at one point and was like, I used to have like a razor sharp memory, and like I'm kind of freaking out that my memory is getting so bad. And she actually just told me like, it's because I was under so much stress at that time period that like I wasn't present in the moment, so like stuff wasn't sinking in at the time, which is probably what it was, because there was really nothing like physically wrong with me, but it was just like the stress was actually making me so like probably disassociated in some ways. So I know I used Tom Ford fragrances and I know which ones I used, and I even have like in my original video where I talked about finding a signature scent, I mentioned the ones that I used, and as I'm talking about them I'm just sort of like, wow, I don't even remember that. But it's like weird because I remember using like my prom fragrance and stuff. So I have notes about the fragrances that I wore in my Tom Ford years, but it's just so weird how much stress I was under that like I know it happened, but I don't have as much of a memory. But I bet if I smelled some of these fragrances, it would probably bring me right back, because like sense memory is like a real thing. So I think the first Tom Ford fragrance that I kind of fell in love with was Velvet Orchid, and that's actually the one that I wore to my wedding. That was my wedding scent when I married my ex-husband, and which is actually interesting because I got to thinking about that when I was thinking about these things, and like it's in terms of scents, but like I say to people a lot, like my wedding day was like not the happiest day of my life. Like, I'm super proud of my wedding, and like because I DIY'd so much of it, like I Pinterest designed it and stuff. Like I did a lot of things myself, like I DIY'd a lot of things. Like I really planned it out and I love the way it was executed. But like the fact that my marriage didn't last very long, I always feel weird talking about it because it's sort of like I can't be like, hey, I'm so proud of how my wedding turned out, but my marriage was not very good. Like that's like, it's just a weird thing for me. I tell people a lot that like my wedding day was like not the happiest day of my life, and I remember having a conversation with a guy I worked with who was a comic who was married and was saying that like that's one of those things where like when you've been like a performer or been on the stage or something, it's like hard to say that like that day was the best day of your life, because you get that kind of like adrenaline rush of like the live performance and things like that like so often. But it is interesting. I designed my wedding to be very old Hollywood. It was in a vintage theater. It was very me, like with the whole old Hollywood theme, and I wanted it to feel like it was like an old Hollywood, like maybe like Oscars after party or something, like feel very chic, like not like I didn't really want it to feel like traditional wedding-y, and it was very much like my taste. And you know, my ex-husband was on board with all that too. But it's interesting looking back, it felt like a performance. Like it felt like this was like a theatrical performance and I was putting on a show, and it didn't feel like I wasn't feeling the emotion of it. Like I wasn't feeling like I was in it. I felt like I was putting on a performance, like I was putting on a show for people. It felt like it was supposed to be like this is a performance, and I didn't actually feel like I was in it. I felt like I was like acting it. So like I can't really smell Velvet Orchid. I had to like retire that fragrance because it just had too many associations with my wedding and stuff. But I also got to thinking about how my wedding dress was actually probably like my third favorite white dress that I wore in my lifetime. Maybe not even that, because my junior prom dress was actually like a white fringe dress that I loved. I didn't like my senior prom dress, which was kind of like a boring beaded dress, because like as I said, like the slip dress was super in back then, and like my body type just does not work with like a slinky slip dress. I've got too much going on up here, and I had such a hard time like finding things that fit me On the top, I remember like my senior prom, I just like got fed up and wore this like beaded gown that I didn't even really like. I loved my junior prom dress, but it was all like white fringe and it felt very like flappery and it like moved when I danced and like I loved it. And then I did a beauty pageant when I was like 25 and I wish I could remember what fragrance I wore to the pageant, but that was like white velvet with like gold and silver embroidery and it had rhinestones in it, and like that dress, I just worshipped that dress. Like I put that dress on and I was just like, this is me. Like I was just so in love with that dress. I'm willing to bet I probably wore Versace blonde because I think that's what I was into at that time period, and that feels like probably what I would have worn for my pageant days. But then by the time I got to my wedding, like I liked my wedding dress, but I don't know, it just didn't feel like it was exactly what I wanted. And then it just, I don't know, there was just a lot of complications that I just feel like there's so much about my wedding that like I'm so proud of, but also the fact that my marriage didn't work out and everything, there was just so much emotion tied to it that like I like retired Velvet Orchid because I was just, I couldn't associate with it anymore. So I also wore Tom Ford Noir Parfum. I don't remember this at all. In the video I did about how to find your signature scent, I actually say that that's my go-to, and I've never had so many compliments when I wore that. So I'm guessing I got compliments when I wore it, but I don't remember that at all. That's actually been discontinued. The description of it is it's an oriental floral. It has a lot of like scent notes in it that are, you know, vanilla, amber, sandalwood, some orangey scents and stuff. I just don't remember it. I have it listed as being sweet, but I just don't remember it. And I know I wore it. Like I can picture the bottle and I can picture myself wearing it, but it's just like not in my memory at all. I also bought Neroli Portofino, which is very kind of like outside my normal scent, although there have been a lot of scents that had neroli in them. This was a citrus. It was very summery. I feel like there was a summer that I got like really obsessed with wearing that. It was like very like light and fresh. I also, in the last video that I did about the fragrances and stuff, I mentioned Orchid Soleil, how much I loved it and how creamy it was and stuff like that. And like I can kind of remember it, but like I don't have much of a memory of it, which is like really freaking me out that I have such little memory of this stuff. But I feel like it was around these years that I started to get like really serious headaches, which I thought were like stress related, which probably partly were, but I also was associating it with every time I wore any kind of perfume or fragrance. So I kind of started to like stop wearing as many fragrances. So I still would try to wear them, but like I would notice that I would get fewer headaches when I didn't wear fragrances. So I don't know if maybe that some of that had something to do with the fact that I can't remember them because my head was hurting most of the time. I also had Tom Ford Tobacco Vanille, which was like super popular at the time. Everyone was wearing it and I got it and I loved it, but I got the worst headaches with that. Like that I know gave me a headache. And that was actually like, I mean, it's got like cacao, tonka bean, which is stuff that I love, like the vanilla. It also had like tobacco leaf in it, which is probably why it gave me a headache, but I loved that scent. Like I thought that, I mean, and I've never been a smoker. I don't like the scent of smoke or anything like that, but like I really did love that scent. It felt very like warm, but I just got the worst headaches, which might have been the tobacco leaf, to be honest. I was starting to notice that like all fragrances were kind of giving me a headache at that time period, which is maybe why I don't remember them. I don't know. I also got Dior Hypnotic Poison because it was so highly recommended. Funny, when I went back to look at my last video on how to pick a signature scent, I feel like a lot of people recommended that I try this Dior Hypnotic Poison. I remember wearing it, but I think I wore it on like dates with my ex, and then like that was kind of like my date night fragrance because it did feel very sexy and I do remember liking it. Then I remember like when I was going through my divorce, I just, again, with the Velvet Orchid, like that just got set aside. It was like, no, I can't. I couldn't deal with the association with the sense memory. So I kind of went on a quest to find like a new fragrance, something that like didn't remind me of like my time period with my ex and things like that and like all the stress I was under. That's when I discovered Angel by Mugler, I think is how you say it. I loved that, but again, every time I wore it, I would get a massive headache. I did get a lot of compliments on this one as well. I was going out more. I got back into doing stand-up because I kind of got away from doing stand-up when I was with my ex, and that's a whole long story. But when my marriage started falling apart, I went back to stand-up because I needed something that was like familiar to me. That was kind of how I was coping with it. Like you kind of like, I needed my cheers. I needed a place where like everybody knew my name. So I was kind of back going out doing stand-up and things like that, and so I was around a lot more people, so I got a lot more compliments. I remember when I wore Angel. It has a lot of notes in it. Again, it's got the chocolate, the caramel, the vanilla, but it's also got a lot of fruity fragrances and stuff like that. I really did love this fragrance, but again, every time I wore it, I would end up with a headache, and I could never really figure it out until I realized like, oh, when I don't wear it, I don't have as much of a headache. So the last fragrance that I want to mention that I bought kind of just before I decided to like be done with fragrances was actually Fracas by Robert Piguet. I'm not exactly sure how you say it. So many of these are French and I'm not really sure. This was actually one that I had wanted because it was mentioned in this book, and I wanted this for so long, and I ended up actually getting this, I think for like my birthday or Christmas or something, like kind of just before I ended up quitting fragrances altogether. So I only wore this for a short time, but it had so many things in it that I loved, like tuberose, and I have liked a lot of orangey scents for sure, like citrusy things, but not like in your face citrus. Like I think the Neroli Portofino was the only one that was really in your face citrus. Spring flower a little bit, but this one was, it was like a creamier floral, I would say, and I did really enjoy it. But again, I kind of like just went cold turkey with my fragrances not too long after I bought that. So I kept my fragrance collection for a long time, and I even collected a lot more, like just for the bottle. And I actually used to, if you remember some of my like videos, there was a time period where I had like kind of right behind me here, I had like a display of like so many fragrances, because I love fragrance bottles and I love the aesthetic of them and everything, but like I just can't do it with like the actual scents. They were just really like giving me a headache, and I just wasn't feeling good. So I'm really hopeful that I can find some clean fragrances that won't give me a headache, that will smell great, will last a long time. So I'm gonna test some out. I'm gonna film a video that will probably be up soon with my first impressions of a whole bunch of clean fragrances, and then I will do an update down the road after I try out some of them to kind of see, you know, which ones I really like and which ones I don't. So this was just kind of like a walk down memory lane. Probably not gonna be my most popular video, but I hope you guys kind of just got to know me a little bit more through my fragrance history, and you kind of got a sense of the scents that I like, and you also know that I'm very cheesy and like puns. Yeah, so this was just kind of like a silly fun video with my fragrance history, and like also testing my memories to see what I can remember and what I can't remember. And again, like how weird it is. Like I'm willing to bet if I smelled some of those Tom Ford fragrances like now, it would probably bring me back to a lot of those memories. But like that time period is just so fuzzy for me, I think, because I was just under so much stress. This was sort of my fragrance history, just a fun little video. I thought you guys could like get to know me a little bit more, and then kind of get to know the kind of fragrances that I've been drawn to over the years. Hopefully it was nostalgic for some of you. If you have any fragrances that like bring back like a super sense memory for you, whether they're either like current favorites or your favorites from the past that like bring up a memory for you, let me know. I want to hear about it. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I always love to hear from you. If you have any requests as far as like doing these fragrance videos or anything like that, either certain ones you want me to test out, ways that would be helpful for you for me to talk about them or anything like that, like just let me know. I want to find a great fragrance for me, but I want to like make this experience of me trying to find one like helpful for you. So yeah, if you found this video like fun, helpful, anything, let me know and leave a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment below. I love to hear from you. If you want to check out like my guided journals, my courses, masterclasses, and all my social media links will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.